Memory of the Holocaust in Poland, the weaponization of the Second World War Museum at Gdansk by the Law and Justice Party. The term memory encompasses a variety of configurations, including individual, social, and collective memories. Jews were eradicated from Poland's social and collective memory as a result of its deep-rooted anti-Semitism, which began well before World War II and continued for decades after. Poland's ultra-right-wing Law and Justice Party embraced this erasure when they attained power in 2015. This was consistent with their views that historical memory should be modified to preserve and advance the national identity of Poles, whom they deemed to be the ultimate nation of victims and martyrs. In furtherance of this ideology, Law and Justice appropriated the nation's museums, using them to indoctrinate its citizens with their perspective. The Second World War Museum in Gdansk is a prime example of Law and Justice's misuse and weaponization of museums, turning them from centers of objective learning into institutions of inculcation for Law and Justice's political gain to the detriment of Poland's collective memory and society at large. A community's perception of its current condition, as well as its prospects for the future, rely heavily on its comprehension and awareness of its past. This understanding comes from individual recollections, which, after becoming part of the public dialogue, become social memory. Social institutions then take this form of memory and change it to suit their needs. As a result, individual remembrances are transformed, becoming the approved and official version of the nation's collective memory. This alternative recollection is created to be readily consumable and consequently can become more accepted by the populace than the facts and recollections on which it was based. Jews were effectively erased from Poland's collective memory as a result of the country's long-standing anti-Semitism. Before World War II, Poles and Jews did not have much contact, though they lived in close proximity. Relationships, if any, were economic rather than social in nature. Jews were seen as others and not a part of the Polish community. The ethno-nationalist majority felt that Polish Jews were the enemy of the state. Consequently, in pre-war Poland, Jews were not considered integral members of Polish society and were, therefore, not included as part of Poland's collective memory. This ethnic divisiveness was compounded by several factors during the war. Many Poles thought that Jews received preferential treatment from the Soviets during their pre-1941 occupation. Next, the Jews were physically removed from Polish society as a result of the Nazis' policies of segregation. Then the impact of the war itself on Jews vastly exceeded the consequences for their Polish neighbors. A disproportionately large number of Jews were killed in Poland, decimating 90% of their pre-war population. Yet, despite this disparate impact, Poland's collective memory had no space for the Jews or their Holocaust because the Poles perceived that they themselves had suffered so much more. Another reason Jews were erased from Polish collective memory was guilt. Many Poles profited handsomely from Nazis' persecution of the Jews. The displacement or annihilation of millions of Polish Jews provided their neighbors with an enormous economic boon as the Poles seized their abandoned property. The Poles conveniently preferred to forget the source of their good fortune. It was blood money and could, upon reflection, only be considered ill-gotten gain that they did not earn and did not deserve to keep. Under communist rule, Poland continued to repress its collective memory of the Jews and the Holocaust for over 40 years. The communists wanted to mold Poland's memory to support their own ideology and legitimacy. According to communism, religion and ethnicity are irrelevant, having been replaced by the working class. Consequently, the Holocaust and Jewish victimization were subsumed into the atrocities committed against all Poles during the war, while Poland was defined as a nation of ultimate victims, martyrs, and heroes. The Holocaust was minimized or ignored, transformed from a genocide into political rhetoric used to support Poland's national identity and collective memory. After the fall of communism in 1989, the new liberal democratic regime attempted to rehabilitate Polish memory, including the issues surrounding the Holocaust. This was accomplished in a number of ways. The Holocaust was written into school books and curricula, mass media covered commemorative events, and corrections were made to the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum to emphasize its role in the Holocaust. This evolution and restoration of memory came to an untimely end in 2015 when the nationalist Law and Justice Party took control of the Polish government. It would return Poland's collective memory to the pre-liberal days, advocating Polish identity above all else. For nationalists, just like communists, recognition of individual religious or ethnic groups undermines the legitimacy of their authority. Nationalists advocate that genuine political power springs exclusively from the nation and that an individual's loyalty to the state is paramount, transcending all other fidelities. Often, nationalism is accompanied by misrepresentations of history meant to facilitate the manipulation of collective memory. Law and Justice actively marshaled political support via this exploitation of memory, moving the populace away from the liberal post-communist restoration and invoking the anti-Semitic rhetoric of the past. To do so, Law and Justice instituted an extreme version of history based on Poland's past national identity. It claimed that during World War II, the heroic, homogeneous Polish citizenry vanquished both its international and domestic enemies, which included Polish Jews. Poles were never collaborators, provocateurs, or profiteers, but rather the ultimate righteous and martyred victims who suffered more than anyone else. According to Law and Justice, their interpretation was the only acceptable version of Poland's past. Thus, under Law and Justice, a factual recounting of Jewish suffering and the Holocaust had no place in Poland's history. In fact, it was destructive to Poland's national identity as the most victimized and martyred population of World War II. Law and Justice ensured that theirs was the version of history that was irreversibly etched into the memories of its citizens. This was accomplished using propaganda spread through a variety of state-controlled activities, including the memorialization of memory through various museums. Historical museums generally function as a fundamental way that society molds its collective memory. Official state museums, especially, are usually regarded as bastions of truth and historical accuracy. However, that is not always the case. Quite often, these institutions are used by governments to attain political legitimacy. The way in which artifacts are selected and displayed can drastically alter the narrative of the past to a given administration's current political agenda. Law and Justice was guilty of perverting Poland's historical museums as part of its desire to define Polish identity and strengthen their grasp on power. The Second World War Museum at Gdansk illustrates Law and Justice's weaponization of museums for political purposes. The Gdansk Museum was initially established in 2008 during Poland's liberal democratic period. It was intended to be the leading World War II museum in Europe. Its ambition was to memorialize World War II as a global conflict and contribute to international historical memory while presenting the Polish point of view. Its exhibits were global as well as local in nature and included Poland's less heroic behavior during the war, such as anti-Semitism. The original Gdansk Museum and its message were products of the liberal democratic thinking of the time. This outlook was deemed unacceptable by Law and Justice as it purportedly focused on the West's view of the conflict and disputed Poland's position as the absolute and ultimate victim of World War II. Law and Justice insisted, instead, that the Gdansk Museum promote their nationalist view of history, emphasizing Poland's misery while highlighting its heroic contributions to the war. The integrity of the Gdansk Museum's original mission was doomed from the time Law and Justice took power. Indeed, once elected, Law and Justice used all its resources to force the Gdansk Museum to rebrand and reflect the party's version of historical memory. Law and Justice slashed the Gdansk Museum's financing and replaced its staff with their own shills, including the founding director. Significant changes were made to exhibits throughout the Gdansk Museum in keeping with Law and Justice's views. Photos, exhibit captions, and statistics were all reworked in support of the new narrative, which redirected attention away from a more even-handed global approach, in order to focus on Poles and their suffering as heroes, victims, and rescuers of Jews. The original purpose of the Gdansk Museum was destroyed. It no longer reflected a universalist approach. Instead, its message was corrupted to alter facts, promoting the views of Law and Justice and their ultra-conservative ideology. The history behind the creation and actualization of the Gdansk Museum is a cautionary tale. Under the ultra-conservative aegis of Law and Justice, what should have been an objective institution of memorialization and education was perverted to suit a political agenda. Universalist views of World War II were replaced with the right wing's version of history in an attempt to revise and control Poland's national identity and collective memory. Uncomfortable facts, such as Poland's deep-rooted anti-Semitism and less than savory behavior during the Holocaust, should not be rewritten to ignore or whitewash the past, nor should they be altered to support a particular political ideology. The manipulation of collective memory for political gain is a slippery slope that endangers not only the public's awareness and knowledge, but the very fabric of society itself.